Good morning, Australia. You've just tuned into Today with Toca, and I'm your host, Toca. Today we have a very special guest from the field of education, talking about him as a learner. Please put your hands together for the very handsome and charismatic Mr. O'Connor. Thank you. You're too kind. It's a pleasure to be here, Toca, but Mr. O'Connor was my father. Tyrone will do just fine. I thought I'd open up with the question we've all been dying to hear the answer to. How do you learn, Tyrone? Well, Toca, I have an extensive competitive background in numerous sports, some of which include combat jiu-jitsu, basketball, cricket, baseball, rugby league, Aussie rules, and most recently, rugby union. I'm also fond of recreational weight training and yoga. Taking all of that into account, and including the fact that I've chosen to major in physical education during my dip ed, it would be fair to say I was very much a kinesthetic and visual learner. I learned by watching demonstrations and practicing the skill at hand. In saying all of that, when it comes to theory-based subjects, I get my best results when I'm able to read and memorize the content directly from the writing source. I suppose you could also say I was a reading-based learner. Do you have any evidence to back up these claims, Tyrone? Well, the most relevant way to prove this would be from my placement experience. It was all well and good to learn theoretically about teaching practices during lectures, but it wasn't until I was able to put these theoretical practices in place that I was able to learn and adapt efficiently. I also learnt how to conduct a class more thoroughly by watching and observing other teachers. Very little would sink in while my mentor was just explaining what he wanted to see, and he tended to do a lot of that. I see. It does seem as though you're more inclined to learn through actually doing or seeing certain things. Next, I was hoping you could explain to all of us what you're like as a teacher. What is effective about your teaching? How do you engage all students in your classes? Toca, I like to take a Bloom's taxonomy approach to developing my curriculums. I feel like this is the best approach as a PE teacher. I like to first develop basic skills in my students and have them be able to repeat them consistently. This represents the remembering phase. I then structure my curriculum so students eventually are able to focus on getting to the last phase of Bloom's, which is creating. They may start to develop and apply their own skills during gameplay. Whether I'm teaching a theory or prac class, I try my best to make sure all students are engaged and included. I try to incorporate all areas of the VARC principles of teaching. Some examples of this include demonstrations and ICT presentations for all visual learners, class discussions and explanations for the auditory learners, reading and research-based tasks for the reading-based learners, and physical activity or model making for the kinesthetic learners. I thought I would bring in some pictures of these examples for your viewing pleasure. It seems as though you have thought a lot about how to provide a very inclusive classroom, Tyrone. I understand Mike Karen is your university lecturer. Thank you, Toca, and yes he is. He is obviously doing a fantastic job on developing the next generation of teachers. My next question for you is based on what you think constitutes effective teaching and learning. How do you know your students are learning and developing? Well, Toca, based on what I learned from a student inclusion professional development day at uni called the Big Day In, I'm fully aware that students learn differently and have different abilities. For this reason, I feel like standardised testing isn't the fairest form of assessment, so I try to limit the amount of written tests I give my students. I try to provide assessment through a number of different ways. They include research-based tasks, observations of class participation, discussions, and so on. And to make sure all students are graded equally, I develop grading rubrics and keep written records of all my students so nothing is forgotten or goes unnoticed. And to make sure I'm on the right track with teaching, I ask my students for feedback, whether it's verbal or survey structured. I actually brought in a few examples of my students' assessment records and me conducting a student survey if you'd like to show the audience. Thank you, that would be wonderful to see. Last but not least, Tyrone, how do you feel we should be looking to educate students in the future? Great question, Toca. I feel as though the education system is beginning to move in the right direction. We are finally starting to realise that everyone is different and therefore learn in different ways. So it is important that I and every other educator make sure to develop curriculum that allows for total inclusion. Also, as time moves on, children are becoming more and more tech savvy. Educators need to move in the same direction and include the use of ICT applications during the delivery of their lessons. This can be seen at my placement school Bayside College, where every student is assigned a laptop and most resources are accessible through the school's internal resource drive. I in fact supervised a mentoring program at the school where Year 9s helped Grade 2 3s with some literacy and numeracy skills. They did this on an online interactive game. Student engagement was high and can be seen from the following pictures that were taken during the lesson. There we have it, Australia. Tyrone O'Connor as a learner. Thank you for your time, Tyrone. We look forward to seeing and hearing about your future teaching experiences. That's all we have time for today. Don't forget to tune in same time tomorrow for your daily fix of Today with Toca. I'm your host, Toca. Goodbye and good day, Australia.